How's everybody doing?
I got back with 30 seconds to spare to crush lunch.
Nice. There we go. Oh, it is definitely a Monday, that's for sure. I know this isn't exactly the most seasonal shirt choice for Code Freeze. I'm not gonna lie, I'm still really looking for a cat t-shirt that also talks about snow or freezing or something. It's these are some real problems I have to deal with, y'all.
Or you could just keep wishing you're in Hawaii. That helps too. It's not snowing there yet. Although
Yeah,
it was snowing in Tucson and Albuquerque, which is very strange.
I do want to point out that you could get a shirt about snowcat like four-wheelers, and that would be really meta and make people kind of like look at you funny.
This is true. I was just on a mountain where the snowcats were grooming all the trails and stuff. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm celebrating the fact that Seattle was supposed to get yet more snow today, but it's actually just really bright and sunny out there and nobody knows what to do with it. And the grocery stores are ransacked yet again. No, it's fine. It's whatever. But yeah, apparently Portland and California are going to have a fun time today through Wednesday, but Seattle just gets sun. It's great. Okay, let's see. I think we have at least enough people to get started. I'm sure we'll have a couple more people pop in as we go along, but I'll start doing the doodly-doo here. So just the trimming and editing stuff is kind of annoying. I still haven't found a good way to really mark it off. So I'd like to welcome everybody to the Kubernetes 114 release team meeting. This is week 8. Today is Monday, February 25th. I am your host, Aaron of Sigbeard, and you are all being publicly recorded. And so, of course, will be on your best behavior to adhere to the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, which boils down to please don't be a jerk. As soon as the recording has been processed, I'll upload this to YouTube so you can all see your smiling faces. I thought the pattern I did last week kind of worked really well. So I'd rather let everybody else go first and kind of clean up stuff at the end. The one thing I will say at the top is, for those of you who missed my community meeting update on Thursday, I'm so excited because it's the start of Burndown, which means we get to start having more meetings. So I get to see you all more often. So if you are on the Kubernetes release team mailing list, or you're the Kubernetes SIG release mailing list, and I think I just added it to the community calendar as well, you should now see that there are additional 30-minute meetings scheduled for Wednesday and Friday, using the same Zoom URI that you are at right now, so same room. And we do have it booked for up to an hour if we have to, but generally I found that Burndown meetings seem to be a little more short and tactically focused. So with that, I would like to hand off to Claire to talk to us about enhancements this week.
Yeah, so right now we have 34 enhancements that are slated for 114. That's 4 less than last week. Just 4 more enhancements getting either deferred or were determined that they didn't actually need to be tracked. I think 2 of those specifically, for those who are curious, that were determined they didn't need to be tracked were AWS out of tree related. So those were removed. 33 of these enhancements are slated with a cup. There's still 1 outstanding. It was due to being an approved exception, but we're making sure that they will have a cup. which brings me to the next bullet point of our enhancements. 15 are at risk due to missing testing plans from their KEPs. This is something that we want all KEPs to have just because it helps us know if they're actually ready. So anything that's in the spreadsheet that's marked as at risk right now, it's probably because there are no testing plans in the KEP that we can find. And we're poking at all of those to get those testing plans in. And Maria, I know I pinged you about this on Slack, but just again, if there are any that it's particularly problematic that there are no KEP plans, let me know and I can be more intense about poking them. And then just for reference of our enhancements we're tracking, 9 are alpha, 11 beta, and 11 are stable. And code freeze is coming up on March 7th. So my team this week is going to be pinging issues just to make sure that everyone knows all open PRs need to be merged by then. So expect, if you're following K enhancements, expect some noise this week.
Since you had mentioned out of tree enhancements, we can talk about this, Natasha or Caitlin, when we get to your section. But I did appreciate that Nishi from SIG AWS made sure to create KEPs and create tracking issues and whatnot. But I'm of the opinion that when it comes to the release team tracking things for burn down, we should only be tracking stuff that lands in Kubernetes. But we probably still want to help out people who are doing things the right way. Like working on your stuff out of tree is what we as a community and as a project would like to encourage because it allows people to release on their own time and on their own schedule. So for whatever reason, SIG AWS would still like to tie to the publicity cycle of 114, and I think I can understand that. I'd like to be clear that there's probably no technical reason they couldn't just release their things right now and go be loud on whatever channels best suit them. But so something to consider as we look to blog posts and just content about the release is to consider how and where we might want to slot in like all of the stuff that has happened outside of Kubernetes in between the 113 release and the 114 release. Because people might have missed those things.
Yeah, Aaron, do you want to wait to get to my section on that, or do you want to have a quick couple-minute discussion on that now?
You know what? Since I brought it up, let's just talk about it now. Why not?
Okay. Yeah. So there's definitely a couple ways that we could do that, and I think we could. I think it goes back to that key messages document that's outside of the blog, where we have those 4 questions that reporters are going to ask each time, and one of them is how does 1.13 and 1.14 tie to each other, and what does this mean for 1.15? And I know during our brainstorm discussion we had slated kind of part of the AWS discussion maybe relevant there. So I feel like we've already kind of started that discussion independently from them, which is wonderful. And I think we could put more messaging in there from the AWS SIG about that. I know this will be definitely interesting to reporters, and we could get them, you know, kind of that bump of coverage that they wanted to. In terms of a blog post separate, I think that's a great idea. We don't have to be tied to the 5-day series, so it doesn't have to come out after the release. We could always put it out before the release, and then we could talk about it, you know, when we're doing the interviews and have their messaging in that key message document, which is sent to all the reporters. And then if they have further questions about the AWS, we could set up separate meetings with that SIG. So we can definitely do some publicity for them around it. We can, you know, post blog on Twitter, you know, things like that. And then we can make sure that we're having discussions around this time frame. I think that would be my recommendation, but I'd love to hear for everybody else what you guys think, or if you know, if that's something that you think they'll go for.
Okay, that sounds like a good compromise for now. It's not something I want to future trip on too hard. it's just the sort of thing where I do want to incentivize that good behavior of giving us as a release team less stuff to track, and you, the cloud providers or content producers, way to produce your content on your own. I just recognize that we have such an awesome hype machine here that people still want to get plugged into it however is most appropriate for them.
Is there a normal way
definitely.
for people to have blog articles going out on the Kubernetes blog that doesn't involve the release cycle? Because if these people...
Yeah, definitely.
Oh,
I'll put it in the chat, but yeah, anybody can submit an original blog post to Caitlin Bernard for the Kubernetes blog, and I can send you kind of the criteria for that and the evaluation. And then we have a blog calendar, and we slate it in there, and then from there we promote that blog on social. So, I mean, anybody can submit a blog as long as it's original content and it follows the criteria. So the SIGs could definitely be submitting blogs as things are finished outside of the release cycle. We actually encourage that. So,
I mean, I just think that it might be worthwhile if there is a way for some of these out-of-tree enhancements, if they want to take advantage of the release machine. It seems like there's more than enough ways for them to do it without involving, you know, yourself or other people who are busy with doing release-related things. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely encourage them. They could write up blogs about what they're doing. We could post it on there. We could promote it on social. You know, I think that's a really good way. Another good time as well is at KubeCon. We have the keynotes. One keynote is dedicated to all CNCF projects and updates on CNCF projects. And so we go out to all the maintainers and we're just, hey, what's going on with your project? Can you provide us updates for the slides? So that's another way that we could get some work that's being done outside of the releases updated to that, you know, 8,000 plus audience, you know, if it falls during an event. So yeah, a blog or during the event are two different ways to promote outside of a release timeframe.
Okay, I think as Claire, perhaps as you and I and others interact with people who, if we encounter more things that they turn out to be out of tree, it sounds like to me the behavior we want to incentivize is, hey, we'd love for you to write a blog post whenever your feature is ready to go. So if you're a cloud provider and you're hooking up some awesome new cloud provider feature to Kubernetes and you can do that today, why not talk about it today? And then we can also make sure during large moments like the next Kubernetes release or a KubeCon or something, we can go back and look at blog posts and kind of be, you know, include like, hey, by the way, if you only read this blog when a new Kubernetes release comes out, you may have missed the following things that also happened.
Yep.
Okay. Just a personal story on working through the enhancements stuff. I haven't had time to go through most of them with this level of detail, but I took a deep dive on an enhancement about node leases. Let me try and find the spreadsheet real fast. But my personal experience was I went to read it to figure out, okay, so like why is this node lease thing being called beta? Was it called alpha before? Like, did it actually go out the door as alpha? Can I go find a documentation or a piece of information that tells me that? And I couldn't by reading the CAP. Okay, so then the test plan, they talked vaguely about like a description of, oh, the word lease was in the tests. So I figured like, oh, maybe if I go like grep the code base and look for tests that have the word lease in them, maybe that'll tell me if tests have been written, but I still don't really know like, okay, how do I go find where the tests are actually running? So I had to ask a question about that. And I got back information that, oh, by the way, like actually this is a feature that's handled by a feature flag. So when we turn the feature flag on, it's automatically on for all the tests. Okay, great. So I guess that means that if I'm CI Signal and I want to understand how this particular feature works, I should be going and looking at all of the release blocking tests. And I think maybe there's some test cases that they've now enumerated in their KEP. Okay. And then the next thing was graduation criteria. The graduation criteria for this particular enhancement was performance improves. How do I know whether or not performance has improved? It seems like I'm not really going to know how to verify that as a member of the release team. And so specifically, they were looking for some kind of metric related to etcd performance at scale to go, I don't know, like up or down in some particular direction. And so I asked them to write all of that in their KEP, and they have a follow-up PR. As I'm talking about this, I'm still trying to actually find the enhancement I'm talking about. But I just wanted to like share that story with you because I don't know if members of the enhancements team have tried to similarly attempt to comprehend what these things are, or members of the CI Signal team have tried to comprehend, like, how are you actually going to make sure these enhancements are being tested? But I certainly found I had to ask a lot of questions. And because I just feel like anything that requires me to start like digging through a code base and pulling out a tool like grep is probably not at a level of sufficient consumption for the release team and a wider, broader audience. Because that was just one enhancement. Now I have to go check 33 others. So when Claire talks about us getting a little noisier about enhancements, that was sort of my story of trying to do that for one of them. I have managed to get a follow-on PR as a result of that. But that's the level of questioning you are empowered to ask. If you look at this and don't really understand what a KEP is saying for your role, feel free to ask questions.
Yeah. And I'll say I did the opposite approach, and rather than deep dive into one, I did all of them at a really high level. And the testing plans for a lot of them felt to me on like the lighter side for those that even had them. So yes, anyone who has follow-up questions, or if things don't make sense and you need help getting through to people, feel free to ping me or let me know if it's insufficient. Feel free to like flag it on the spreadsheet as well as at risk if you don't think their plans are sufficient.
Okay. Thank you for that, Claire. I know that was a lot of work. Moving on to Maria to talk to us about CI Signal.
Yep, hello. Good. So compared to last week, we're looking at significantly more turbulence, I would say. But the good part is that we have had good response in terms of open issues. So the failures that we see at the moment are at least relatively new. We don't have a lot of ongoing stuff. In terms of numbers, we're looking at 3 failing jobs at the moment in master blocking, 5 in release master upgrade, and 4 failing jobs in the 114 blocking dashboard. Some of them are repeated across dashboards, so it's at least, we expect that once they get resolved, things are going to clear out across different dashboards, but this is going to be our sort of like priority in terms of backlog this week, just clearing this out on the lead for code freeze. The other thing on our heads is going back to enhancements and looking at test plans. I mentioned last week that we had a first run through a couple of weeks ago, and a lot of them were not quite defined yet, or were described as like to be decided. So part of what we're going to do this week is go back and figure out, you know, given what's described here as a test plan for this feature, are we confident enough that we could say, yes, this can get a stamp of approval from end-to-end testing. I mentioned last week that we would start to pay a lot more attention in signal quality, as well as, I guess, signal state. And by that I refer to how stable tests are. We've started looking a little bit at numbers and percentages, like how much of the time is a job failing for a good reason. This is very much something that I'd like to focus on, especially as we lead up to release date. But as I said, priorities for this week is to clear out test grid and to get to a comfortable state with testing plans for enhancement. Any questions or opinions around any of that?
So I'd like to understand how I can best keep track of what you're seeing and how you're seeing it. So just to give folks a picture of when we talk about CI signal not being great, this is what the master blocking job looks like. And it's probably too tiny for you to really tell, but part of what I'm trying to illustrate is there are all these little red dots everywhere. There's not really one consistent stream of red, except at the top. And all of the red at the top means that the job is basically failing continuously and has been for weeks, which is not great. This is the point at which I would be escalating and trying to go chase down the SIG, and I would expect CI signal to ask the release team to increase visibility on this sort of thing. Similarly, if I go and take a look at the release 114 blocking board, so this is now fast forwarded sort of on a daily basis, which actually gives us something really cool from a flake perspective. You see how there's that like large black rectangle up there. So I hover, it flips between like one black rectangle to another. This is basically how this was the Kubernetes release 114 branch sitting at the same commit over the weekend before Hannes fast forwarded it. And so all of these different tests that are all failing in different ways are all failing in different ways against the exact same commit. So this is probably a hint to us that these particular tests are flaky. The release branch is really useful for this sort of differentiation between is it a flake or is it an actual failure that was introduced as a result of some commit. If I keep scrolling over to the right here, all right, so this was sort of when the board was created, and then this was when we first cut the very first beta. So you can see we have some data about flakiness. It looks way worse on the serial board. Like that's a whole lot of red. So when I see things like this, I expect I should be able to go look for issues with the V114 milestone that have a kind failing test attached to them. When I see a board like this, I expect that I should be able to go look for issues in the V114 milestone that have kind flake attached to them. I won't go doing that right now, but I'm curious in the spelunking I've done on issues, Maria, I feel like I've seen like there's a project board out there, and I know that there's a Google Doc that you're updating. What's the story?
Yes, so the Google Doc and the project board are two tools that we experimented with, mainly to be able to coordinate amongst ourselves on who's following up on what, because opening a GitHub issue for a failing test is sort of the first step to getting it resolved. A lot of the time it has follow-up with the SIG on Slack or on calls and whatnot. So that helped us with keeping track of who's doing what and what the status is for each failure. We haven't really gone ahead with the project board. It wasn't a very comfortable tool for us to do the things that we wanted to do. The spreadsheet was a bit clunkier, but in the end, it just worked better in terms of having a snapshot of where we're at as a team. Filtering, going on GitHub issues for KK and filtering on kind failing test and kind flake and milestones, though we haven't been putting them until now, as I just realized. I can go back and retrofit that, is probably the best way that somebody outside the team can go in and filter for issues that are already open. no created issues at the moment. Does that work? Is there a different format that would be easier?
I think that works. Like I did add a couple issues to Milestone that seemed like they pertain to failures that are happening today and impact the release right now. What I'm less clear on is the most effective way to collaborate and coordinate on escalation. The fact that some of these things have been sitting in red for forever, you absolutely have the authority, privilege, and capability to escalate and get us to go be loud and chase down a SIG. This is also the sort of thing I feel like the issue triage team can help you out with, because these are particularly hot button issues.
Yeah, and I think we have done that. We have had a couple of escalations in the last few weeks. It's tricky with the jobs, I guess the top level jobs, because a lot of the time the reason why they are red is for a test that belongs to a different SIG. So while the job itself is red for a long time, the individual tests that caused it to fail at each run are different, which just makes things a little blurrier.
Okay, and I apologize for not being on top of this, but I feel like we talked like last week or 2 weeks ago about the fact that right now we don't have tests in release master blocking or release master informing or the 114 variants that stands up a cluster on AWS. It was unclear to me whether the intent was to move the COPS AWS job back in or to proceed without the COPS AWS job and to create a release that is tested solely by the set of bash scripts that stand up clusters in GCE and the kubeadm job, which we'll get to later.
So what we talked about last week was that the COPS job was fairly stable, but I think there hasn't been any further discussion on that. Let me, however, follow up on that.
Okay.
I cannot follow up on this.
That sounds good. There might be an issue for this. I don't know off the top of my head. If there isn't, if you can go ahead and make one and make sure I'm assigned on it, that would help. Okay. Moving on to bug triage. Gianluca, is that how I pronounce your name?
That's good, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just the ambassador, so Nico left a couple of notes. He started to grab metrics from issues and pull requests that are open without any label, a kind label to SIG label, and he started to train us about what to do next, because it looks like it's going to be hot time for the bug triage from now. So in the meantime, we are digging into the new automation cycle to get all these metrics. And we started with the Kubernetes stuff, but it looks like it's not what we are looking for. So we are evaluating other possible implementation.
Okay. So a similar comment / opinion for the bug triage team. I now feel like there should be significantly more issues in the 114 milestone. Because we are now at burn down, I would rather sort of err on the side of having too much in the 114 milestone and kicking it out as we discover it's not pertinent to this release, rather than issues sort of piecemeal sneaking their way into the milestone as burn down progresses. Like new issues that we uncover through the course of debugging, okay, that's clearly, we can't prevent that from happening. But in terms of planned work that is outstanding, that has not yet made it in, that all should be in the V114 milestone right now. So if you or other members of the bug triage team are not able to add issues to the milestone, please talk to Nico about that. I'm pretty sure there's a PR we could file against the Kubernetes org repo to get you added to the milestone maintainers team so that you can do that.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's slightly less clear to me whether or not we should be putting that together, that same level of scrutiny for PRs, because there are a lot of PRs that get opened up and land really quickly. But I think possibly for some of the larger, like size XL, size XXL PRs, or PRs that have been hanging around for a while, those are also helpful to have added to the milestone. And then similarly, as we start to burn down, we're going to want to understand the relative priority of issues. And so this is where the OpenKK issues without kind or SIG labels, maybe you have another one for without priority labels. You could also, I think you could also adjust the query so it looks for like needs dash priority or needs dash kind. And even like literally just taking a best guess at priority is a start. And then as we progress through burndown, we'll start to refine those priorities and figure out what the really important stuff is and what we should really be focusing on. Now, release team, this is just my perspective as somebody who starts to get really paranoid as we enter burndown. I'm totally happy, or like you're all welcome to stand up and say like, I'm being too paranoid. Here's what we should do instead. I'm just throwing out there things that I've seen in the past and how I personally have operated in the past. But there are 29 of you. So I'm just one person with one opinion. What do the other 28 of you think?
I think personally, I'm still too new, but it's really helpful to hear the other opinions on this scenario, right? Like as a shadow, it's like I have to know what folks are thinking. So I do appreciate the insight.
Okay. Let's see here. So moving on to test infra, Amit, are you here?
Yep. So looking at the number of PRs merged this week, it was around 144, which is a good sign that we're speeding up with code freeze looming around the corner. Speaking of next upcoming milestone is that code freeze will begin next week, end of day Thursday on March 7th. For folks, as a reminder, code freeze means that all PRs would need the priority critical urgent label and the milestone 114 label.
Just the milestone label this time around.
All right.
That's the change we decided to make.
Yeah, this is the change. And then in terms of infrastructure health, people are noticing that Prow and Tide were very slow last week. And this was because of a bunch of client refactors going in to Prow. They have since been reverted and Prow is running on a healthy and data state as of now. So it should be good. And that's it.
Are we still moving ahead with the whole Spyglass Kubernetes thing?
Yes, so we have a link now in both Spyglass and Kubernetes that point to each other. And on top of Kubernetes, you can see that we're moving to deprecated, but we will still keep the PR dashboard around.
Okay, any questions? All right. Thanks, Amit. Next up, we have Jim to talk to us about docs.
Yep. Hey, everybody. First off, I want to apologize. I've been a little out of band lately. I've been traveling more than I've been on the ground the past 2 weeks, so it's good now that things are settling down. It's going to be pretty much crunch time from here on out. We have our placeholder deadline for at least an open PR, which this means is if there's something that requires docs, we just want a placeholder. It could be a blank PR saying, hey, here's where our docs exist. Here's where we're going to put them. Preferably it'd be the full docs or at least partial docs, but placeholder PR would be acceptable as well. So I'm going to be working with my shadows to make sure that every single enhancement that's in scope has a placeholder doc if it needs it. And that's going to be our primary focus for the next, 4 or 5 days here. And we're going to have some I guess I'm going to say we'll have a lot more clearer metrics of where we're at come next release meeting on Monday. Along with the same lines there, I know we revamped our permission structure for the enhancements sheet that we're working off of. And the docs team in particular leverages that very heavily to change whether something needs docs or doesn't need docs. And, my apologies if this has already came up before or not, but we're finding some of the shadows need to request permission to join the Kubernetes release team Google group as part of being able to make changes for that enhancement spreadsheet. So I've included that in our release playbook or our handbook for moving forward, but just kind of throwing it out there, maybe we start adding in the shadows for that enhancement spreadsheet or the Kubernetes release team group that we're keying off of as part of the release cycle that we kick off. Because right now what we're having happen is the shadows are going to these enhancements, checking on them, submitting comments, but they aren't able to update the enhancement spreadsheet. So I can't get metrics to report back, here's exactly where we are today without doubling efforts, I guess. So not the end of the world, but that's kind of where we're at today. I think, now we're going to hit crunch time and things are going to start coming fast.
Hey, Jim, I just added a release team onboarding document to the SIG release repo. We should for sure get you the access you need, but can we perhaps document that people with this role need this access on there just so we can all, just document all of the access for all of the roles and shadows and what have you.
Yeah, that'd be great, Mike. Do you mind linking that in the notes here so I can jump in there?
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, in general, every release team related artifact is gated by that group. And if you're a member of the release team, leader, shadow, or whatever, you should be in that group. It used to be way more complicated than that, and I have tried to simplify it down to that this cycle. So that may be why we've had some bumps along the way. So I apologize for that. I see one outstanding invite to that group right now that I'll ping you about offline. Make sure that things get moving for you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. Let's talk about release notes. I think I'm going to go to Jeff for this.
Yep. So I'm going to share my screen because we have a couple things to talk about. And Aaron, please time box me so I don't pull a U and talk for 20 minutes because I might with this. Desktop to share.
Thanks, I guess.
Oh no, I wish I had your breadth of being able to talk for that long. Normally I tend to leave a lot out. You're the exact opposite. I appreciate that. Point is, tangibly right now, release notes, all we're really working on is updating the draft weekly, and then we are going to start gathering the external dependencies. We also, as a group, met, and there's a reason why I'm sharing. As a group, we were talking about different ways we might be able to change the release notes to be a little bit more functional for end users. Right now, if you look at release notes for an end user, it's kind of confusing. And please, someone tell me otherwise, because I would love to hear other opinions. Right now, we are very much, kind of an echo chamber. But let's take a look at 113's changelog. Urgent upgrade notes and security content, that totally makes sense. Known issues make sense. Deprecations is useful. These are all things that we as the release notes team will have to pull out manually, and that's fine. But let's talk about major themes. If you really read a lot of these major themes, it isn't what's going into a release, it's what that SIG may have done over the course of that release cycle. So essentially, it's them giving their quarterly community update in our release notes. SIG Big Data, during the 113 release cycle, SIG Big Data focused on community engagements. That has nothing to do with 113. I'm not just gonna like take a jab at that SIG. I'll take a jab at SIG UI. The migration to the newest version of Angular is still under active development. This has nothing to do with 113. This is literally giving an update for SIGs. So why are we collecting themes when also as a release notes team, collecting these themes is like pulling teeth from SIGs? Apparently for the last few release cycles, we have had to hound them to give us content when realistically they're rehashing the release notes anyways. So make some popcorn. I would love to hear some opinions.
I would love, I mean, if we think that the major themes aren't really adding value now that we're tracking enhancements a little more thoroughly, one thing we could consider doing is getting rid of major themes and just having kind of the top section where we talk about things that are action required or security fixes, and then just enumerate the enhancements that we know are going into the release and have been tracked and what have you, and then just do away with the section.
I love that.
Yeah, I agree, and this is Natasha. I think if they want to talk about major themes and things that they've been working on, again, the Kubernetes blog is a really great spot. I just talked to Caitlin a little bit during this call. We were hot and heavy on blogs, and now we've kind of slowed down, so we need blogs. And again, we promote this on social. So I think that that is a great compromise of a place to put things that we want to get out from the SIG, but that are not relevant to the release notes and the release itself.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Aaron. Sorry.
I ranted about this at length for the 113 retrospective. I don't know if they're still in there, but there was something about SIG IBM Cloud in the release notes and about how their proprietary, let's find IBM Cloud. Cool, yeah. They get to talk about how they released something in IKS. They announced a new version of Kubernetes in their Kubernetes service. That is not allowed in a file called changelog in Kubernetes. That has nothing to do with the code in Kubernetes.
Exactly. This really is, I feel like we solicit SIGs for themes. They tell us what they've worked on. Sometimes they're just rehashing or restating the changelog or the release notes that are further down here already.
So here's the problem, and I say this as somebody who did release notes way back in 1.4 when it was much lower volume.
Shoot.
The way that it used to be is you had a single human being reading through all of the pull requests and then deciding with their editorial voice what was the most important thing. And so they used their brain like a machine learning algorithm to kind of cluster things together and have the major themes come out of that. And then we eventually decided that was too much work for one single person to do. And so we started federating or mapping all of that out to the SIGs and asked, hey, could you please decide amongst the PRs that you know that you submitted, which ones you think are most important? And so that came back. And then eventually that kind of turned into, hey, SIGs, could you talk about your major themes? And then that came back. What still seems to be lacking is that single editorial voice. I think that like documentation, technical writers are gods and they should have the ability to make the final call, full stop. So I really think if you want to talk about this in the technical sense, there's a map and then there's a reduce, and we are missing the reduce step. And I think that there really needs to be like a single or a very select few people who contribute their editorial voice to what actually are the important major themes of this release. And in some way, that's kind of the process that Natasha tried to kick off as we started talking about the blog post. right?
And yeah, and that was actually like, I feel like that process should be intertwined with this. If you're going to have up to, not necessarily exactly, but up to 5 different blog posts highlighting things in this release, I mean, you're already collecting the themes and you're blogging about those themes.
Yeah.
That was my thinking.
Like the themes totally were a thing that organically evolved out of us humans trying to cluster together the 1,000 or whatever pull requests that end up landing for each release. So to me, the next practical step would be to take this and get rid of all the SIG specific stuff and then just talk about like 1 or 2 key themes.
So this goes back to thinking about end users. And actually, let me pull this up. I will read this out loud. Release notes give our users a heads up about what is coming when they install or upgrade to a particular release of Kubernetes. They are not primarily contributors. Do they need to know what a SIG is?
No, I don't think they do. But so here's the thing. Like this is optimized for the categorization on content producers because it's a lot of work to take all of this content and synthesize it into and translate it into all of the user-facing stuff.
Yep.
And there are probably some differences of opinion around what is more important or less important to be surfaced. And so I don't know that I have a great answer there. Like I'd like to find a way for all of the SIGs to provide their input and to have a say, but at the end of the day, the decision lies with a single human being or just a couple human beings to preserve that editorial voice.
You know, speaking from a consumer of Kubernetes and consumer of the release notes when they're coming out, you know, I really do like keeping up with what all the other SIGs are doing, but I definitely see Jeff's point. This is not a release or a, you know, component of the release. I wonder if there's a compromise here where all the SIGs can provide all this information, the team release notes, or maybe in collaboration with docs, could come up with the underlying themes of what's really truly important. But then also maybe as part of SIG docs or the release notes team, they also create the blog post of here's the overall themes of all the SIGs, and then they have the SIGs review them. And the reason I say that is because it's unreasonable to think every single SIG is going to write a single blog post or collaborate with each other. I see the SIG release being the forcing function to have quarterly updates of the state of all SIGs. You know, SIG UI, for example, where are they at? What are they doing with dashboard? You know, while we're picking on them.
So, I mean,
you know.
the thing is, the forcing function isn't necessarily SIG release. It's actually SIG contribex. Because for a SIG to exist, they have to, this is like a requirement of a SIG, as far as I know, have to provide quarterly updates at the community meeting.
Okay,
so
yes.
They already have to present this once every 3 to 4 months.
So that's a great point. I guess what I'm looking or suggesting is formalizing a way that that blog is assembled. You know, maybe it is contribex and maybe that's part of SIG release. You know, I see kind of a blurry line between SIG docs, the release notes, and contribex for something like this. Happy to help out, happy to have that discussion. I would hate to say let's scrap it and just get the core, you know, here's what's going to break in 113 or 114, here's what's going to be fixed, here's what changed. You know, I like to know what's kind of going on in the overall ecosphere of Kubernetes. And if it's a blog post, that'd be just as fine as, you know, massive amounts of release notes.
Definitely,
Yeah.
I think we're going to have more to talk about. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say it's worth noting that once or twice a year, each SIG generally provides this sort of update, at least in video form, in the form of a deep dive at KubeCon or something. But I see what you're saying, like one paragraph for each SIG in a single document is probably a little easier to parse than like 17 videos or something. It's an interesting point.
Okay, I got a time box here.
All right, can I have 1 more minute? Because I have to show you in real time the thing that I showed you a screenshot of. So the final thing was thinking of new release notes formats. Thinking about, again, this is kind of an unwieldy document, and I don't know if everyone actually cares about every single thing in here. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a little website that took the output of someone's awesome Go util that generates release notes and also has an output to JSON, thank you, Mike, and then lets you just filter whatever you want to see. And since they're already, going off of GitHub labels, we can see everything that changed with kubectl. And now this was just a weekend project, and I still have a lot of other things I want to add to it, but it is actually showing a little bit of promise. And this whole thing on the left is completely auto-generated from all the categories that Mike's utility puts into JSON. I think that is a minute. I'm out.
Yeah, that looks really neat. I think there's got to be some kind of compromise between a change log that's literally just the pull request title for every pull request and themes. Maybe this helps us explore and get there. Okay, so on a totally unrelated note, let's go over to comms and hear from Natasha. Is Natasha here?
Hello, all. Yep. Sorry,
Yeah.
just unmuting. Great. So from a comms side, we are in a good spot. We had a great brainstorm the week before where we went over the enhancements doc and pulled out some enhancements that we really want to highlight in the release blog. Obviously, we know that this may change depending on their completion of work, but we've identified a few things, and so as a group, we're kind of going back to each SIG to get some more information, find out the likelihood of it making it into the release, determining the aspects of the enhancement to see if it works with a 5-day blog series, all of that great work that's going on behind the scenes. And then from there, we'll start writing out the release blog timed with March 7th when we have the next freeze, and get something for the release team to start reviewing in the SIGs. So all of that good work is started in there. And then, we're just kind of synthesizing and going back, and then we'll have something concrete probably in the next week and a half to look at.
Okay. Any questions for Natasha? So in terms of the place to coordinate, do you have links available to the Google Docs? I'm trying to dig through the release notes. I can see the release marketing plan. I found that, but I didn't find the one where we had sort of the release themes and stuff that we could maybe brainstorm around.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll put those in the meeting notes right now.
Okay.
And I'll also put in the key messages document, the one that we're going to need to fill out for media interviews as well. I'll link all of that in there. And then just to beat a dead horse, if there is something that is not going to make it into this release, but will be ready before the next release, a blog post on Kubernetes.io would be greatly appreciated. Caitlin and I are super easy to work with when it comes to reviewing your blog post and getting it up and getting it promoted on social. So please work with us on that.
Okay, thanks, Natasha. Moving on, a good clip here to get it under the gun. Hannes, do you want to talk to us about branch management?
Sure. Hello, everybody. So since a couple of days, the daily branch fast forwards are live. I'll try to do them in my mornings. I'll try to get a bit, or I try to work together a bit more closely with CI Signal to understand when we want to do the fast forwards or if we want to hold them. If anybody of you ever feels that we should wait with a fast forward to get some more signal, ping me. Totally fine, no problem. Regarding the caps for packaging, package creation and package releases, where SIG release, namely me mostly, and SIG cluster lifecycle is involved. It was decided to not bring them in for 1.14. We didn't get to a consensus on what it actually should be. However, it's being worked on and should come in with the next release then. So we are continuously working on that and hopefully have something then to pull in early hopefully early for the 1.15 release. What else? Tomorrow there is another cut. We are cutting beta 1 tomorrow with one of my shadows. And, well, yeah, you see a couple of metrics for the beta 0. Any questions?
No questions. Thank you for the caps on package creation. You're in my review queue. You and like 50 other shell check PRs. Okay. Thank you for that, Hannes. So I did save one item for open discussion at the end here, though I don't know that we need to talk about it a bunch. Essentially, we got an ask from the SIG cluster lifecycle folks to remove the existing kubeadm jobs and replace them, the ones that stand up a kubeadm cluster on GCE with Kubernetes Anywhere. And they provided a rationale that they would like to replace those instead with jobs that stand up a Kubernetes cluster with kind. So it may not necessarily be the same full fidelity cluster that Kubernetes Anywhere stands up, but it is consistently more actively supported than Kubernetes Anywhere. And if I personally use the willingness and ability of people to support a job as one of the release blocking criteria for that job, I'm super on board with changing this now, earlier, before code freeze. I don't know that anybody else here will really have any objections, but I just thought I'd put it on the table if we want to talk about it.
The only question I would have is, why remove the jobs right away? Why not run them in parallel for a while to see if something weird comes up and remove the Kubernetes Anywhere or whatever it's called jobs someone later?
Because if you leave them in the release blocking dashboard, they might become red. And the problem there is that nobody wants to maintain them anymore.
I see. Thanks.
Question from me, Lubomir Aaron. So do these kind jobs use the cloud provider resources like
no.
the Kubernetes Anywhere used to do?
No, kind is local. It basically creates a cluster inside the...
Correct. So it's not one-for-one replacement, right? Because the earlier Kubernetes Anywhere jobs used to use the in-tree providers to do volumes and stuff.
So absolutely, it's not one-to-one in the cloud provider front. At the same time, we do run conformance tests on the cluster.
Yeah, so, right. But it doesn't test the cloud provider stuff, which the previous job used to do.
Yes, definitely. That's true.
Like at a high level, I think I hear you, Dims, that this is reducing our level of test coverage.
Correct. Exactly. So for at least for 1.14, I would say run them both in parallel. Don't turn down the other jobs yet, please, till we figure out a way to do cloud provider stuff with kind.
So with kind, I don't think we should ever do cloud provider stuff. The thing about the Kubernetes Anywhere problem is that it's not reproducible locally, so I cannot debug.
Right. If we're not going to do kind cloud provider stuff, then we have to wait for the cluster API. So we cannot get rid of Kubernetes Anywhere right this second.
So my question here is, I thought that the existing pile of bash that stands up the majority of our clusters for release jobs does in fact set the cloud provider. Correct. So the functionality is being exercised there. What dropping this particular Kubernetes Anywhere job would do is in the matrix of like a cluster stood up with kubeadm that also happens to use the GCE cluster provider, right? That's what we would be dropping.
Correct.
Right, and we never had that matrix with any other cloud provider with kubeadm.
Right. So the only one that we have, we are dropping, Ben.
Correct, but we also have that same one in all of the other CI almost entirely.
Yeah, so Kubernetes Anywhere is special, but the problem here is that we are not testing GC, we are testing the deployer. And, we already have coverage using kubeup to bring up clusters in the GC infrastructure. So what happens is that with Kubernetes Anywhere, we are testing the Kubernetes Anywhere deployer and not the cloud provider.
Okay.
So I apologize, but I'm at time. I have to run to something else. So we'll take this offline, but thank you for the discussion and happy Monday, everybody.